The Islamic Republic of Iran is one of the few countries in the world whose official discourse contains explicit anti-Semitism. And anti-Jewish expressions and motifs appear in the writings of senior clerics, in scholarly books, and in the media. At the beginning of this century, a new theme emerged among members of the hardline faction of the Iranian political arena, which presents the Jews as enemies of Iran, not only of Islam, but of Iran as a state, from the biblical period to the present. The resort to this new line probably stemmed from the realization that arguments which presents the Jews as enemies of Islam no longer resonates among members of the younger generation, who is not impressed by Islamic ideology anymore, but is very patriotic. And therefore, if you use the theme of Jews as enemies of Iran, you may appeal to such young people. At the same time, such presentation serves the government's policy of presenting Iran as the victim of continuous conspiracies by internal and external enemies, hence the need for constant vigilance against these imaginary enemies and the resort to repressive measures against any real or perceived enemies. Now, in Jewish collective memory, the Achaemenid Empire, particularly Cyrus the Great, have a very, very positive place. The only exception is the story of Purim, where supposedly the Jews were saved by the attempt to exterminate them miraculously, and the Jews celebrate this in the holiday of Purim. And again, according to the biblical book of Esther, the Jews took revenge of their enemies throughout the Persian Empire, and it's important here, and killed 74,000 people of their enemies. Now, there is no corroboration, by the way, to the Esther story in any contemporary Persian source or in any in Iranian collective memory. And in fact, various scholars deny the veracity of the story. Now, 15 years ago, Dr. Hassan Abbasi, a Revolutionary Guard officer from the Indoctrination Division, modified the biblical story by accusing the Jews of massacring more than 70,000 Persians, not people throughout the empire, but Persians, as part of their vengeance campaign following the fall of Haman. He presents this story as an example of Jewish enmity toward Iran, which he claims has continued unabated to the present. Following him, a larger group of writers developed this story to a comprehensive Jewish conspiracy whose features clearly draw from European anti-Semitic motifs. With the passage of time, the official media endorsed the story under the title of the Iranian Holocaust, Holocaust-e-Irani. The newly invented story uses classical anti-Semitic tropes, linking the Jews to finances, sex, and political intrigues. It's also based on a series of dichotomies between Iranians and Jews. We have Haman, the true Iranian patriot, and Mordechai, the manipulative Jew, member of the Jewish oligarchy and of the Zion faction, probably allusion to the elders of Zion. We have Vashti, the symbol of Persian chastity, versus Esther, or the manipulative Jewess, the model of the females the Jews use as spies and court manipulators, spreading moral corruption in their societies. Now, according to the new story in Iran, Haman wanted to save Iran from Jewish control and exploitation, and he wanted to expel the Jews, not to kill them, but to expel them from Iran. However, when his plans reached the convention of the Jews, again, probably allusion to the elders of Zion meetings, Mordechai, the manipulative Jew, got the king drunk, and Esther, using sexual manipulations, induced the king to sign his death sentence. Thus, 50 years after the coming of the Jews to Iran, at the time when the mighty Achaemenid Empire reached its peak, it fell into the hands of the Jews. A Jewish minister controlled the court, and a Jewish woman controlled the harem, and both controlled the king. Now, in addition to executing Haman, the Jews perpetrated a grand massacre of the Iranians. Now, whereas the biblical story speaks of 74,000 throughout the empire, the new story speaks of 70,000 Persians. Some authors, using independent sources which do not exist, raise the number to 500,000 Iranians. Now, since at the time the entire population of the Achaemenid Empire was estimated at 800,000, the Jews either killed 10% of the Iranian population or 60% of the Iranian population. Either way, the Jews committed or carried out a genocide against the Iranian people, and therefore, whichever number is used, the Iranians use the term, again, the Iranian Holocaust. Now, the use of the term Holocaust is highly significant because the official discourse in Iran denies the Jewish Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazis. Still, the resort to the term Holocaust either reflects recognition of the Holocaust as the measure of ultimate harm or evil history, and also various members, Iranian writers, complain that while the Jews insist on talking about their false Holocaust, they want the world to think that the actual massacre that they committed against the Iranians did not exist. Now, significantly, none of the writers raise the questions such as how could the Jews murder, let's say, 50% of the Iranian population and still remain a minority? How could the Jews eliminate 50% of the Iranians and Iran still remained a mighty empire 200 years later? Now, the absence of any, again, documentary evidence to this story doesn't bother the writers because it is a proof of the Jewish conspiracy to eliminate all evidence. Now, the Jewish crime is augmented by the Jewish celebration in gratitude of this Holocaust. And the peak of these celebrations take place in occupied Palestine, where they reach the level of insanity in wine drinking and drunkenness. And the most blatant feature of these celebrations is drinking a blood-like beverage as a symbol of the Jewish thirst for blood and of their hatred toward Iran. Now, if I move to another case, the dissemination of the anti-Semitic motifs from Europe led to the inclusion of European Jews, particularly British and Zionist Jews, to the imaginary Jewish plutocratic conspiracy against Iran. The plutocratic Jewish conspiracy against Iran reached its peak with the central role Jews played in causing the Great Famine that plagued Iran in the years 1917 to 1919. Now, there was famine in the Middle East. About 10% of the population of the Middle East did perish in the famine at the end of the First World War. There is a story invented in Iran, which I won't go into details, that claims that 2 million out of 9 million Iranians perished in this famine. There is no proof whatsoever for this story. And it's based on a mistake, but I won't go into it. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran endorsed the story of the 2 million Iranian dead, again, because it claimed it serves the policy to present Iran as a victim of Western conspiracy. Again, several Iranian writers, including university professors and mid-ranking clerics, took it one step further, and by positioning the Jews as the key players in the British policy that caused this famine. Especially, of course, Rothschild family. Also, Jews played a key role in the court of King Edward VII at the time when the Iranian-British oil, truly, by the way, unfair oil concession was signed. Hence, the Jews are responsible for the oil, for the exploitative oil concession forced on Iran. Now, according to this narrative, the course of the First World War was heavily influenced by, again, Jewish capitalists and warlords and their influence over the British and American governments. And again, according to the master plan as stipulated by the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the British conquest of Palestine and the 1917 Balfour Declaration at one hand, and the British invasion of Iran on the other hand, are intertwined here as a joint conspiracy. And the Jew, Rothschild, was the leading person manipulating the famine in Iran for two reasons. One, he wanted to facilitate British entry to Iran. And secondly, he knew in 1919 that 70 years later, Iran would play a key role against Israel. And therefore, he wanted to weaken Iran then in order to help Israel now. So it is the Jews who are responsible for the death of 2 million Iranians from starvation. Now, as is the case with many conspiracy theories, the lack of historical evidence serves the theorists as a proof not only of the occurrence of the plot, but also to the sinister power of the perpetrators. Similarly, the genocide that took place in Purim as part of the struggle enhances the story of Iranian victimhood. Now, to wrap up these points, the representation of the Jews as enemies of Iran constitutes a shift from traditional anti-Judaism, which existed in pre-modern Iran, to modern anti-Semitism. Modern anti-Semitism primarily aims at undermining, anti-Judaism is mainly a religious ideology that seeks to undermine Judaism as a religion, to show its inferiority vis-a-vis Islam. Modern anti-Semitism adds demonization of the Jews, adds conspiracy theories, and usually is much more sinister about the intended future of the Jews. And again, the importance of this political aspect in this discourse is evident in linking the Jews to other modern enemies of Iran. Now, the traditional anti-Jewish discourse was primarily Shia-Islamic and was directed against the small, defenseless Jewish community with the aim of converting them to Islam. The current discourse vilifies both Iranian Jews, but also the Jews as a historical collective. The aim is not to convert the Jews, but who are portrayed as a people with almost immutable genetic characteristics, with the converts presented as fifth columnists threatening Iran from within. The apparent goal of the present anti-Semitic discourse is to unite the Iranian people behind the regime against its past and present enemies. Formerly, the anti-Jewish discourse reflected the clerics' sense of power, but the present discourse portrays the Shias in general, and the Iranians in particular, as victims of Jewish and foreign conspiracies throughout history. An important modern feature of the new discourse is the endorsement of anti-Semitic theories originating from Europe and applying them to Iran, most prominently the prevalent use of the terms Holocaust and the charge against the Jews of perpetrating it on the Iranian twice. The appropriation of the term shows how the Holocaust has become the universal criteria for suffering, including by those who deny its existence. Like many anti-Semitic theories, the Iranian one contains basic fallacies and contradictions. Like Western anti-Semites, the Iranian writers on the Jewish conspiracies do not bother to explain internal contradictions in their stories, as anti-Semitic allegations aim at achieving political goals. The historical truth is irrelevant to its promoters and often to the target audience, if they share the same view. Now, unlike the Arab nationalist and Sunni Islamist discourse, the Iranian discourse refers to the Jews as a people, kaum, not as a religion, with almost completely unchanging attributes from the times of antiquity to the present. Conceivably, the use of this term, people, reflects the impact of European anti-Semitism, which contains racist motifs, as the negative Jewish traits persist even among Jewish converts to Islam. And by the way, if you don't know, Ahmadinejad was Jewish, and so are many other senior clerics, by anyone who doesn't like them. The presentation of the Jews as a distinct people, and even more so as enemies of Iran across generations, defines them as the alien outsiders who have no place in Iran. Finally, a close look at the evolution of the new anti-Jewish discourse shows how radical ideas gradually move from the margins to the center. Abbasi was one writer. His ideas were gradually adopted by other writers, and also, most important, by news agencies affiliated with major Iranian institutions, such as the Revolutionary Guards. So we see how the ideas move from the margins to the center. At the same time, the resort to this discourse on the Jews as enemies of Iran, at the present, is only, the resort is only by members of the hardline camp in Iran, and this may point, hopefully, to its limited reception by larger audiences, presumably because it is seen as part of the broader political, ideological struggle inside Iran between hardliners and more reform-minded Iranians. And again, the hardliner camp is today the dominant camp in Iran, but it is not the popular camp in Iran. And one can only hope, therefore, that this new approach will not become part of the mainstream of the public. Thank you very much.